The princess was not who she was before, and never would be again. But who she was now was precious. That had been true before the wizard, and it was true after, and it would remain true for the rest of her days. For there are some things that can never be lost or taken away. The end.
Are we supposed to stand?
Yeah, sure. Company bow. Company bow. Yes, especially him.
I like to thank all the
Yes. I'd like to thank my mommy, my daddy, and all the little people.
Speaking of,
Hi, little person.
I had a burning question, but I think you answered it at the end.
What's the burning question?
What color is the rose garden?
Good question. So I made some concept drawings, which we'll set them on a table and people can look at them later. I did this when I was in my doctoral class. This is how I take notes. If I'm not doing something creative, I'm not listening. We've got the kitchen.
Mommy, I want to
It's very bright, and I'm like, I wouldn't mind doing dishes in this kitchen. And I hate doing dishes, which is why I made the traveler do it. We've got the library.
I want to see the library.
The library.
It doesn't look. That's too many books.
Well, it's in a castle.
Never too many.
We've got the garden when the traveler enters into it. And this was the garden before.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's even beautiful than it looks on the other.
I know, that's because when the wizard attacked, a lot of things were destroyed and broken.
But how did she attack?
with
We-
magic.
Mm-hmm.
So which scenes were you going to cut out?
All the dialogue scenes except the garden. Originally, it was the only time that anyone spoke was in the garden scene because that was the biggest emphasis. But in school, I've learned a lot more about trauma. And one of the goals of the story is when you're reading it, the reader learns through the eyes of the traveler how to recognize the signs of post-traumatic stress. And those are shown mostly, through the library scenes in the garden with him and her talking to one another and just kind of interacting. She flinches at loud noises. Everyone knows she doesn't like to be touched. And they're like, yeah, whatever. But he's like, this is, leave her alone, seriously, drop it. But everyone else is just so used to, okay, get back to normal, that they're not really able to recognize it. Eva.
Is this based off of any real events?
Yes. Various types of events. It's estimated roughly 1 in 4 women will be attacked. And yes. It is very, very accurate.
Cupcake.
What was Jack's sermon?
He told a sermon where the illustration was a man from England went to the States and slavery was still, happening. And there's this young, beautiful African-American woman who everyone starts bidding on her and they start saying these lewd things they're going to do. And he had struck gold and the man pays like 10 times more than what she's worth. And he takes her over here and she's, I hate you. And he takes her through these winding roads and he goes into a shop and you hear, but it's the law. I bought her, she's mine, I can do as I please. But it's the law. I bought her, she's mine, I will do as I please. And he comes out and hands her these papers and he says, take them, you're free. These are your papers that say that you're a free woman. And she's like, I hate you, why are you mocking me? And he says, no, I bought you to set you free. And she goes, you bought me to set me free, you bought me to set me free. And it starts hitting her. She's like, you bought me to set me free, I can't believe you bought me to set me free. And that concept just I love the story. I love the stories he tells. And but that repeat kept on coming. And the concept of, and it's not just true with assault, any form of trauma can give people sort of the sensation that they're frozen in time and unable to move forward, but they can't move back. And so the concept of a frozen heart. And so, okay, what would it mean for someone to, for a fairy tale? And the guys are all trying to win her, and then the traveler who's just a good person. And I love it because in the garden scene, there's nothing in it that can be really interpreted as romantic. They do become romantic, but the conversation in the garden is a compilation of conversations I've had with people who've helped me through some very difficult times, who the people that was always completely platonic. So the concept, you had said, I hope the guy doesn't save her. The man doesn't save her. She is helped by a friend. And then the community starts healing, and she starts healing, and then they're able to help one another.
I said to you, who's the traveler? I'm like, the traveler's a good therapist.
Right? Right? Good old Sage.
I really like how, because I feel like if it was like romantic all along, I like how it kind of grew romantic out of friendship, because if it was romantic all along, it would have felt like still like there was some sort of goal, and then it just wouldn't have felt as genuine as it did. And so I really like that it was just like out of a friendship, and that was really nice.
I was thinking at first that the traveler might be a symbol for Jesus, but I'm guessing that's not the case.
In a sense, he is the Christ figure.
Yeah.
Right.
Literature,
Yeah.
But it's not, the story's not entirely allegorical.
Correct.
So what about the name?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked.
Wow.
Is there a plant in the audience?
Just a mother.
It's like, yeah.
So, did anyone catch their names?
You only yelled it out once.
I know.
Jackie and
So,
Wait, say louder.
author's note. I have not decided if I will ever include this information. The princess's name is Jacqueline. The traveler's name is Sage. Sage means wise. In gardening, sage is a companion plant to roses because it repels unwanted insects. It is also a cleansing herb with healing benefits, including reduction of stress and depression. Jacqueline, I know, because if I'm going to do it, I'm going to go hard. Jacqueline.
Layers of symbolism.
Oh, yes. I mean, I wasn't sure if I was going to share to people, but it meant so much that I knew what their names were.
I feel like Sage was actually created solely for this story.
Right? Jacqueline means supplanter, to supersede another, especially by force or treachery. See Jacob. This harkens to her confessing in the garden how she felt like she died in the attack and was replaced by someone else. There is a rose named Jacqueline Dupree. Last but not least, Jacqueline is the feminine of Jack, whose sermon loosely inspired the story.
Very good.
If I ever include their names, apart from like this, it would probably be at either the beginning before the story actually begins or as an afterword. The princess's name would only be used once, intimately by Sage in the garden when he says one of the most important lines of the story. It wasn't your fault, Jackie.
That's good.
Drawing attention to it. And she uses his name when she says, do not raise up false hopes with yourself or anyone else I love.
I didn't think she was referencing his name. I thought she was referencing him as a sage person, like you wise person. That's what I thought was going on.
Well, I guess in a double way, yeah.
In a sense, he does live up to his name.
By the way, so she mentioned a rose called Jacqueline Dupre. Jacqueline Dupre was a famous cellist, and the music that you were listening to while we were mingling was actually her playing cello. So I'm paying attention, and I read the script.
So.
Just the Ocean's 11 by every detail.
Oh, wait, there's intentionality in writing. What a thought.
Any other questions, comments before I give thanks?
I kind of sort of thought that it would have, a happy ending. But I was also thinking knowing you a little bit, maybe, that it would be an interesting twist if it turned out to be a tragedy, in the sense that Jackie became whole, and Sage told Jackie that he must be on his way because there are other parts for him to help become whole.
I had thought about that a little bit, but then I realized that would give him a hero complex. But you get the, again, Nat, well done convincing me to keep those scenes. The first time they see each other in the library, you can see both of them are pretty snarky. Both of them have a similar sense of humor. Both of them like the same books, which suggests they have got other similar interests. And it's like, you know what, these actually would become natural friends, which is why he helps her. It's because he cares about her as a person. Yeah, so I thought about it, but...
I like it.
I don't know. I love setting up the princess as like such like a strong like intellectual person, by like the library being her place of refuge. Because like the first thing we learn about her is that before the wizard attacked, she was beautiful, and it's like, oh, we learned something else other than her beauty about her.
Great personality.
Every Disney princess is beautiful, but not all of them breed.
Belle does. And Rapunzel. No, she's the only character who has any form of physical description, and it's just that she's beautiful. And the reason I do that is I'm wanting girls to read this and project themselves into it if they identify with her. And so if they put themselves in as the princess, because when you don't have a face, if you identify the character, you tend to make them look like you. And so the concept being, if they read it again, they would be told, hey, you're beautiful. And you are strong, and you are smart, and you are these things as well.
So who's the audience you wrote it for, besides us?
Me. Mostly me. I believe children learn best by the games we play, the songs we sing, and the stories we tell. And there are many things like Assault that don't make any sense. And something had happened to me, and I couldn't make sense of it. And it both seemed way too complicated, but also seemingly simple. There is a sense that is very autobiographical, and I'm like, okay, I think we're overcomplicating this. How can I make sense of my pain? And it was, well, once upon a time, there was a princess, and there was a wizard, and she drove him away, but even still, and da-da-da-da-da. And so it was my way of trying to make sense of things. But then the last few years in college, my master's degree, it's very trauma-focused. And learning more about it, it became more and more for the people who I'm eventually going to be speaking and writing for.
And as much as it's autobiographical, did you say there's only one person who's kind of a traveler in a platonic sense for you?
She's not afraid to ask the hard questions.
Am I in hot seat now?
I was just, he reminded me of Jack.
Yeah.
You said the sermon inspired it. I was wondering if he also inspired the character.
In large parts, there are a couple guy friends who the conversation in the garden is a compilation of various conversations I've had over the years. In many ways, direct quotes and direct physical interactions. Sage held her, and one of my sages held me. One of them said, you were a victim, that's not all you were, but you were at least that much. And the rest of that quote. And there are various other, I'm sorry, I'm being an idiot, I'm being foolish. No, you're not, this is important. You know, things like that. It's a combination of many people in my life who incidentally were men, which I think is great. So I've got a couple of them. Yeah, sure.
What do you think
represents tending the garden, like gardening in real life.
Yeah. Ooh. Well, it's not putting fake happy things over it. So first off, it's plants. Remember, photosynthesis. Everyone was, oh, let's put these happy things over it so no one sees it's dead. And the sun was never able to reach it. And so the broken things were never able to be cut off, and the things that were still alive were never able to be tended. So the first thing was no longer doing these stifling things that would have halted the healing process first. Other tending things, I'm a big supporter of therapy, and yes, everyone who's ever been in therapy, can I get a heck yeah? Heck yeah! My people. So therapy's great. Physical exercise, artistic endeavors, community, being happy where you can, being sad where you're not. One of the things that they mentions is she and Sage are, walking in the garden, but, they'll walk outside, but they don't always go down to the garden. And if they're down there, it's not always grieving. She's finding a new way to live where she's being taken care of, as opposed to just, well, this is who I was and this is who they did love and I need to get back to that. Did that answer the question at all?
I like how the garden's health parallels her.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's clear, but I really like that.
I like how he respects her boundaries. He asks permission.
Repeatedly, yeah. And when she says no, he like actually respects that.
I love that.
And leaves gently, too. Like, he won't let the door slam behind him in anger or anything.
He's so thoughtful. Jim?
So it's like, certainly you can point at a person, it's like, there was a battle. You didn't get into the battle. But then, like, for the story, like, it's really not about that. Is that, like,
Yeah.
deliberate that you didn't have, like, a play-by-play with spells really fast or how
So it's funny. The last time I did a bit of the reading for United Adoration, Elise had mentioned I wanted to hear what happened in the garden, and I'm like, oh, I'm sure you would, but that's not the point. The point is, she went in, had an encounter, came out a different person. And Sage is telling Jacqueline often, and he's telling the people in the kitchen, it's like when you start comparing, you're going to hurt her. Because I think, we all want to be optimistic and brave, and, other people have had it worse. Someone will always have had it worse. And if it becomes a competition, I'm not allowed to grieve until I'm the worst one, you're never going to heal at all.
But at the end where we see that there was this blown out part here and this crater here was like, oh!
Yep.
Oh,
There's some illusion. Asher, then Eva.
I assume this also isn't the point of it, but as you've thought about these characters for now months, have you thought about what happens after the story at all?
Oh gosh. Not really. It does not end happily ever after. Because life isn't exactly like that. I'm like, if you've experienced a trauma, it always stays with you. Someone explained it once. Trauma is very much like you wake up and it's the first thing you think of, and you go to sleep and it's the first thing you think of, and then after a while it's the second thing. And so in Jacqueline's case, it shaped her as a person, and it shaped her family, her community, in ways. And but we can see it's hopeful, because they are taking, the healthy steps to tend it rather than cover it. So there's not a sequel in mind. There's not a... Eva, then Rachel. Yeah.
First, I liked the knife, how she cuts the apples with it and then lets him cut the branch with it. she doesn't sleep well, does she avoid sleep because of the nightmares, or is it just that her sleep is interrupted by the nightmares?
Both. And the dagger, a friend, one of my sages, said this to me, and it just stood out to me. He said something like, trust or friendship is giving the weapons that could hurt you to your friend and trusting that they will use it to defend you. And it's very, very clear symbol that she's always on her guard. And she's essentially giving him her weapon, and he uses it to heal rather than mess up. I'm like, yes. Rachel?
So I love the part about the community starting to relearn more helpful ways of interacting with her. I love that she stops going to the suitor space.
She's like, I'm done. I'm out.
I love the whole story. That was fun.
Yeah.
If at the moment that he says, I feel her heart to give it back to her, and instead of immediately saying, okay, I can read it back to you, if she had, so to speak, held on to it for, let's say, a year before they reached that point in their relationship, what do you think she would have done?
Ooh. Good question.
I don't know, maybe she would have gone to grad school. Worked on a doctorate, written a story, who's to
Yelled
say?
at God for making her do the doctorate.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, you want to write it?
I think Chris is going to talk.
Oh, Chris.
I actually wanted to. I really liked that there wasn't a play-by-play of the fight with the wizard, because that actually let it be, I think, more easy for the reader or listener to sort of put their own experience on it.
Yep.
So I actually really like that. If anything, I almost wonder if there's a way of making it even more general, of like something happened that she's carrying with her, and it's not until the suitor maybe over the course of conversation that more of that comes out. I'm not saying like that would make it better, but I wonder would that make it even more transferable of like something that even the townspeople don't know, just like something changed her. And part of it is not only to sort of crack into that, but understand it, and it's not theirs to understand. I don't know, just a thought, but I love that it was general in so many ways.
Yeah. And again, wanting people to be able to put their own stories into it. One of the things she says when Sage is holding on to her, I was so scared and it hurt and I was all alone. There's only 2 people who know what happened in there.
Right.
We don't know what happened in there. Sage doesn't know. No one knows except her and the wizard. And just it kind of emphasizes just how alone that moment is. Finn and John.
So this kind of actually digs into that question a little too. It comes up several times throughout this pattern of she was the winner, wasn't hurt, wasn't the victim.
Yeah.
She was the victim, was hurt, and winning was hollow. So it's kind of this misdiagnosis that she tries to keep herself persuaded of. But in the real world, what does that mean? What does that translate? You're drawing from some kind of pattern in a understanding. How does that play out in the real world? For someone who's a victim, what does it mean to say that you won?
Yeah, it can look a couple ways. Let me think.
Is that survival?
Sort of. There's not exactly a survivor's guilt, but more like, suppose, for example, you're walking home and someone jumps you and you fight them and you run away. Did you win? Sure. Is the world safe anymore? No. If someone you knew started to molest you or assault you and you were able to push them away, did you stop them from doing anything illegal? Yes. Did you win? Nope. According to the police? Yep. So there's a bit more of that. That's her element.
So in this case, like for example, you can say the wizard did not succeed in his agenda or whatever.
Well, it's interesting because the way it's done, it's like, I think the way the villagers are responding to it is, she's survived and he's gone. Win. But at the same time, they're saying, oh, but the wizard did freeze her. And destroyed her plants. Sucks. So,
It's hard enough to keep them alive.
And
yeah.
I think the comparison between that and like warfare is really smart.
Yeah.
That it's like this, like I you know, the term shell shock isn't used so much. It's now post-traumatic stress disorder, which in some ways I think shell shock is such an evocative term.
Perfect.
I kind of miss it being used, but it's also like this same experience. You don't have to be on the battlefield to be shell shocked per se.
Yep.
And the transferability, I thought that was really, really good.
Yeah, there was a nod to veterans.
Yeah.
Eva.
I have two things now.
Yeah.
But first, in relation to what Chris said, I just happened to be on final course with science in my history class. And I actually, there's a lot of similarity between Olong, who's the main character, in Mark's book, and Jack in this one.
Yes.
In terms of the trauma and the reaction to everyday occurrences that shouldn't bother them,
Mm-hmm.
but it does every day.
Yeah.
And my other thing was, what's the purpose of including the king specifically in the story? Because the townsfolk are all reacting in a similar grieving manner, but the king's reaction was slightly different. Like, what were you trying to say through the king, I guess?
Good question. So, in situations of assault, and there's a wide spectrum of it, when that happens, the males in a girl's family, and it happens to boys as well, but the males in a girl's family who has been assaulted, the relationship changes drastically. They can, and there's a spectrum of how a father or brother would react to finding out what happened to their sister, their daughter. But there are many, many occurrences that I've spoken to people about, and I've read about, and I've heard about where the girls have said things like, "I lost my dad that day." And so we see the king, you know, he feels ashamed, he feels like he should have protected her, even though, as it said, you know, the wizard was deceitful, that's the whole point. But I'm glad you brought him up, because one of the things is, at the end, we don't get any suggestion that the relationship between the princess and her father was restored. We see that she's making friends, and you know, much of her community is still there, but the conversation between the king and Sage is just the two of them. The king never looks at her. And it's sad, but like, I mean, you get he definitely loves her, but he uses curse language in the final scene. And Sage says something like, "If I saved her, if I did this," because we've already seen he doesn't see it as a curse. She was traumatized, but the king sees it as curse, and their relationship is never, you know, if there was a sequel, who knows.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's why the king, because it really, really changes family dynamics, especially between the daughter and brothers or fathers.
It'd be interesting to hear the story from his point of view and what journey he goes on, like in his brokenness of like.
I don't have the heart. Oh boy.
Maybe you need a writing partner, like.
The king.
Oh boy.
Maybe do a funny happy switch.
Gosh, as the princess with the frozen heart.
I'm going to put in a vote for
The
not a
king,
sequel.
the king with the frozen heart.
Oh boy. Lily.
I find it interesting how different people respond to like pain, I guess, or like other people experiencing pain or other people experiencing trauma. Because I think like I don't know. I've met a lot of people who think that because they haven't experienced that same pain or hurt, that they then don't have a right to help you or talk to you about it. And then I love how Sage is like he says, he's like, I've never experienced anything like this. But he still is willing to be there for her and, recognize, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like you've been hurt, and he's still, is willing to be there for her. So I think that you don't necessarily have to have experienced trauma or any jarring feeling of your own to just be a good friend.
Yeah. No notes. Asher then Eva.
I thought it was really interesting that Sage emphasizes or tries to explain to Jackie that she was a victim. I definitely have heard the cliche of you're not a victim, you're a survivor. But at the same time, I get that potentially thinking of yourself perpetually as a victim could be harmful as well. So where's the semantic balance that we should make?
Good question. She is not a victim, but she was victimized. By constantly saying, I'm not a victim, I'm not a victim, I'm not a victim, she and the others in the story were not able to accept the horror. Because if you're a survivor, that's a very positive, yes, the can-do attitude, but what she's needing at this point in time is to grieve. And you can't do that if the only story you tell is, well, I won. She needs to first see, no, I was very hurt by whatever happened in there, and I was broken. You can't heal until you acknowledge there was a wound.
So, is there a certain level of brutal honesty that sometimes we need to acknowledge?
I would say kind honesty, loving honesty. That interchange was an exact quote between me and my one of my professors. We've been talking about stuff, and he said that, and it occurred to me, it's that is the first time anyone has said anything like that about this experience, and I think something just healed. You were a victim. That might not be all that you were, but you were at least that much. Yeah, therapist. Let's hear it.
So there's this. I think where the two lines are in that spectrum. On one hand is not being in denial, right, which is what Puppet described. He's willing to go there as the person's right to take seriously how deep the pain is and let them express it fully and explore. Here's what really happened, how it felt to me, right? And honesty. The flip side of it is helping them know the power of their own agency. So someone, their own agency.
Yeah.
Agency. Someone doesn't take on someone can be a victim, but they only take on an identity of victim over the long term if they no longer believe in their own agency.
Right.
So, and that's part of what the problem with what King did. He completely ignored her agency, her capacity to make decisions for her own life after this event.
Eva? Thanks, Rachel.
I just wanted to say that
Speak up.
it's very important that Sage was not scared of her because everyone else tiptoed around her and didn't want to go into the garden and just but he he wasn't scared of her, so he saw even worse than what people were already scared of, and he still didn't. And that was very important to see.
Yeah.
I love that there's so many fairy tale elements in the story. There's a wizard, there's magic, there's a princess, there's the king offering the kingdom and the hand. Like there's all these.
The repetition.
The suitors, all the heroes trying to, all that stuff. But you turn it on its head in several ways. And so I appreciate the charm of having those kind of traditional elements and then the creativity of really against
Yeah.
it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had fun with that.
And I did like the parallel as she was healing, the garden was healing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, there's a fun little, I situated intentionally so like people who need to believe that there was a curse could say, oh, she's laughing and the roses have begun to bloom because she's laughing. But then I'm thinking, maybe she was laughing because she saw the roses were blooming. Or maybe something funny was said. It's like, we don't know. It's whoever's reading it, if they want to be, there was a curse or there wasn't a curse, both would make sense. Santa.
What stood out to me, among many things, a big thing that stood out to me was her insistence that she had let everybody down. Instead of everybody letting her down by assuming or expecting, that she would just go back to normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really,
Yeah. It's not survivor's guilt, but trauma, one of the things it often does is, makes you feel an awful lot of shame for not just what happened, but the fact that you're not able to just bounce back. So that's pretty common.
At the end, when he's explaining that he saved her heart to give it back to her, and then says he said that to her before. And then earlier, when it said she smiled after something special was told her.
Someone she deeply cared for said something delightful to her and she smiled.
Yes. Is that what he said?
Yes.
Is that what he
Yes.
Good catch.
Well, friends, one of the wonderful things about these kinds of events, and more importantly, these kinds of works of art, is that they do stick with you. And our hope is that you won't be able to finish asking your questions because it's more things of this story and what is evoked in you and your friendship with Kelsey. And as you continue to think about what's happening, more things are going to come to your mind and more things are going to percolate. And Lord willing, you'll have access to Kelsey to ask her those questions at another time. So I do want to thank you, Kelsey, for doing this. Round of applause. I also want to get a better picture than everyone just staring mesmerizingly at us while we were reading. So can you all look like you're really happy to be here?